Mobile hunters, if you're interested in upping your mobile game, then head to tetherednation.com and check out their saddle gear. There are a few things that you can buy that will actually help you become a better deer hunter or give you the freedom to hunt any tree or any situation. This reason is why I started saddle hunting in the first place and why I use Tethered's gear. I can honestly say that Tethered's saddle gear has changed how I hunt for the better. Big tree, little tree, from the ground, it doesn't matter. I'm untethered by my gear to hunt the best setup for the situation instead of hunting for a tree that my gear can use. My current core setup consists of the Phantom saddle, tethered one sticks, and the Predator platform, and along with an assortment of their accessories. So if you want to up your mobile game, head over to tetherednation.com. If you're like me, you spend a lot of time poring over maps, looking at weather data, all in an effort to help predict when and where my best times are to hunt. It'd be nice if there was a reliable source with all this information in one place. Enter the Spartan Forge app. Unlike some other predictive apps on the market, Spartan Forge was created from military combat intelligence experience tailored for hunters and stands at the nexus of machine learning and whitetail deer hunting. No more man-made algorithms. This is a predictive model based on real GPS collared deer data, historical and predictive weather, and the next level of mapping imagery, all at my fingertips. I've had an opportunity to use the desktop version of Spartan Forge last year and recently the beta version of the iOS app, and it has replaced all of my other mapping tools. Head over to SpartanForgeAI.com to sign up today to get your place in line as the mobile app launches soon. This podcast is brought to you by Skull Brew Coffee Company. Skull Brew Coffee roasts premium single origin coffee, guaranteeing to deliver the freshest coffee directly to your doorstep. The kicker? They're 2% for conservation certified and donate 10% of their proceeds back to organizations who support the interests of our hunting community. So go to skullbrewcoffee.com and pick up one of their 3-killer roasts and fuel your hunt and fill more tags with Skull Brew Coffee. Welcome to the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast, brought to you by Skull Brew Coffee Company. I'm your host, Clint Campbell, and you're listening to episode number 252. Today I'm joined by my buddy Troy Pottenger to talk hunting rugged mountain whitetails and using scrapes to get it done. So stay tuned. All right. What is up, everyone? Happy Wednesday to you. Hope you are doing well. Hope you are feeling fine on this October, I don't know, what is this, the 18th, 19th, the 20th, I think, is what we're looking at. So we are squarely in that time frame where it is pretty much go time. Had a good hunt this past weekend. Went to a spot that I had never hunted before. I scouted last year with my good buddy, Greg Litzinger. We did a little scouting session together, and we found this particular area, and it was an area I had talked about previously where I had a camera stolen, and I actually ended up taking what I had laying in my garage, just like a junk camera that kind of works, kind of doesn't work, and I tossed it up, knowing that if it got stolen, I wouldn't be too awfully mad about it. I mean, it still would tick me off, and it doesn't take great pictures, but I just wanted to see what was there, and lo and behold, the last time I pulled the cameras, there was, one decent buck that was on that camera. And so I was like, I'll figure out a time where I'll throw a hunt at it. The access is kind of, being honest, it's kind of crappy to do it right. There isn't really any easy access necessarily. And I ended up just hunting it this weekend because the other places that I would maybe prefer to hunt, either the wind wasn't quite right for it, or, we have this cold front that hit on Sunday, at least in my area, and into Monday and Tuesday. And I was like, you know what, those are going to be the days that are going to be better to kind of make a dive into some of my better spots kind of for the first time, and the wind's going to be better for those days. And Saturday it was kind of hot, cooler morning, but as it went on, I think we got up into like the mid 80s. So it wasn't going to be, I didn't feel like it was going to be great, and definitely not worth burning a sit on a good spot. So I made the hike in here, and the other thing too is I really wanted to see what the wind was going to do in there because I had no clue. I'd never hunted it before. I needed to start wind mapping it a little bit. And so I was like, all right, well, I got a south wind. I feel like I can make a south wind work in there. And so let's just go throw a flyer at it and see what happens. So I get in there, first light, had a shooter come in, kind of picked him up late. It's so thick in this area that I don't really see deer. Even I even think when the foliage comes down off the trees that I'm still not going to see deer until they're kind of right on top of you. And that's kind of what was the case. I mean, he was maybe, 25 yards maybe when I saw him. And I just saw the back leg, knew it was a deer, and then he picked his head up from behind some brush and saw his head and saw his antlers. And immediately he was like, that's a shooter. And so he kind of circled, away from me a little bit, was kind of heading north. And so I wasn't going to get real aggressive with him or anything like that. These deer, in hindsight, all the deer that are in here were super calm. And so I know that I'm in kind of in very close to a bedding area, and may even be between two bedding areas. I'm not exactly sure what is kind of to my, I guess, my west or my northwest a little bit. That seems to be where all the deer were coming from, essentially. So I let him get out of eyesight, and I just gave him a soft grunt just to say, hey, there's an adolescent, a young buck that's in the area. He's not challenging you, but I'm just letting you know I'm here. And he turned right around, came, made a scrape, was kind of angry, circled back behind me, wanted to see where that deer was at, didn't see the deer. He got a little spooky. I still didn't have a shot at this point. I mean, he was only at 15 yards when he made that scrape. I couldn't get a shot. There was brush. When he circled back behind me, I mean, there wasn't really anything between he and I, but I'm kind of in this really thick area. So many saplings that he was probably, I think, the closest 10 yards, and I just could not get an arrow through anything. So I just kind of watched him, and he got a little spooky there for a second and stood for like 5 minutes, just kind of checked things out, and then just walked back north the direction he was coming from. And I have an idea in talking to Greg afterwards that there's a bed that we had found not too far from maybe the direction he was coming. So he might have been just kind of filtering up, from the area in which he might have been bedding. That's a possibility, but not 100% sure. I was actually going to hunt that bed, but decided that I preferred to kind of hunt this area that was kind of north of the bed. The access was actually easier for the bed. It would have been easier in and out. But I was just intrigued by the spot, and also wanted to just even see if my camera was there or not. So then he kind of moved off, and like a half hour later, a buck comes out, from the south of me, and out of this kind of thick, nasty stuff. And there's this area that I was hunting. The reason there was a camera there was a primary scrape, and there was also a signpost rub. And this buck comes out from the south and just starts hammering on that signpost rope. And I just saw him at the last second when he kind of cleared the thick stuff and into like this very small opening. Still not open enough to shoot, but I could at least see him. And he comes in and just starts ramming the signpost rub and ripping that up. And then he basically filtered up right past me at 5 yards in front of me, the one place where I had a shot. And when I saw him, after I got a look at him as he was kind of approaching me, I had my bow in my hand, and I just realized that he wasn't the one I'd seen previously. He was smaller, younger, good looking buck. So I just filmed him for a while and watched him for like 15 minutes, just do deer things, which is awesome. Best way to get an education is just be around deer. And so I spent 15 minutes with him, watching him, filming him, watching him scent check things and stuff like that. And it was killer. Good looking 8-point, just a little young, probably 2.5-year-old, maybe a 3.5-year-old. But he needs another year, and if he makes it, he'll be a dandy buck next year. So that was kind of the hunt for the most part. Saw a handful of does too, 7 does in the morning. And, I wasn't near a food source. Like I said, I was in a bedding area and some really thick, nasty cover. And I'm basically was able to kind of learn, what some of these deer are doing in this area. So I'm a little bit more educated for the next hunt that I might have in this spot, and I'll look to probably get back there sometime that week right before Halloween. But speaking of Halloween, we know that scrapes and stuff become a big factor as we kind of move into the rest of October here. And I have a killer guest for you guys today. I have Troy Pottenger on. Hunts in Idaho, mountain hunter. He's maybe one of the best mountain hunters you'll ever talk to. He's hunting not just mountains, but in areas where he's not the apex predator. He's got grizzlies, he's got mountain lions, he's got wolves that the bucks he's chasing are having to contend with, not to mention just the harsh winters and the snow and stuff like that kind of comes along with hunting in the Idaho mountains. He's also a big scrape guy. He likes to hunt over scrapes, kills a lot of his bucks in and around scrapes, not just primary scrapes, but he also has a very specific method by which he makes mock scrapes that are super effective. So we talk about all those things with Troy today. So super cool show today. Super stoked to have him on. Before we do that though, quick reminder, head over to skullbrewcoffee.com, use the promo code TRUTH or TFTS21, get yourself some savings. Check out the pour over travel packs. Don't drink shitty coffee on your travel hunts this year. And then also head to truthfromthestand.com, go to the merch tab, and pick yourself up some dope Truth merch. TFTS promo code or TFTS21 promo code to save yourself some cash there. And as always, I want to thank you all for listening. All right, folks, welcome back to another episode of the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast. And today I got a gentleman on that I've been wanting to have on for quite some time. And, this podcast will come out here probably sometime mid-ish October, which is kind of the perfect timing to be speaking to none other than Mr. Troy Pottenger, as he's well known for his approach to hunting scrapes, also well known for hunting very rugged country, targeting very mature deer in some of the toughest places to chase deer. So how you doing tonight, Troy?
Good, Clint. I'm glad to be on the show.
Yeah, man, I appreciate you making some time to jump on. I feel like we almost had like a semi-podcast before we actually got on the podcast talking about shed dogs and shed hunting and stuff like that. It could have been a whole session unto itself.
Yeah, you probably should have hit record now.
Yeah, I know, right? It's like I've only been doing this for 6 years. I probably should have hit record. I still haven't learned. I'm still a rookie, man. Still a rookie.
Well, maybe down the road in the spring we hit that, because that's a pretty good topic nowadays. In the spring.
For sure. Especially, and we'll get into this in more detail, but especially whenever you're targeting specific bucks, and I know finding sheds for you has been one of those things that's also helped kind of unlock where a mystery buck might be spending a lot of times, and becomes, a critical piece of the puzzle for you in many cases if you're able to get onto a shed of a specific deer you're chasing. So I definitely think we should cover that in the spring. Be happy to.
Yeah, that'd be a good time. And I think there's a lot of merit in that gets overlooked and misunderstood out there when it comes to, if a big whitetail buck sheds early, like they do in your, I don't know when they shed in your country, but out here, my big ones usually shed well before they have to migrate. And it's a lot of times it's a dead giveaway of their favorite hideout after a lot of pressure at the end of the season.
Yeah. Yeah. They shed a little later here. I mean, some of the earlier ones, you might be able to get a little intel. I'm trying to think, probably, I mean, I basically in the area that I hunt, I will hunt late season all the way through until the end of January. And you'll start seeing some deer dropping around then every so often. And I feel like the big drop doesn't really happen till sometime in like February-ish, if I'm not mistaken. Like that seems like when the majority of them would drop, but I basically get through like a full hunting season, including late season, and they're still holding. And so, you can definitely find some of their hidey holes for late season specifically. And if you get, I don't want to say get lucky, but if you have a buck that's gonna summer and winter in the same place because they have a consistent food source or something like that, that's in that consistent area, it's not uncommon for them to return. But that's also a couple other pieces of intel you got to kind of put together. I don't know that I would base it all on just finding a shed, but it sounds like you're able to kind of put the pieces together a little bit better just based on how early they drop, and that they're not maybe making, to your point, that migration kind of transition.
Yeah, the reason I've killed a lot of my best whitetails, oldest, biggest whitetails in the mountains, because they're so worn out, their testosterone levels drop off early in this country. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times they're dropping January 1st, right around January 1st. So that's definitely a little earlier than you're seeing them drop.
Yeah. Yeah. And you'll get the occasional like outlier, but a lot of times around here, it would probably more, maybe he's sick, or he had an extremely hard rut or got nicked by a car. It's something like that. It's usually some type of stress is when you'll see them drop early around here, not just from, normal, not just a normal drop necessarily.
Right. And I think our normal drop out here is early because of the stress these animals endure. Yeah. These mountain bucks, it's a whole different lifestyle. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We could go into that in depth, too, down the road.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think that's an appropriate place to kind of just pivot real quick before we get too far down the rabbit hole of talking big mountain deer and scrape hunting and stuff like that. But before we get jamming on all the good stuff, for those that are out there that are listening that maybe haven't heard you before, I know you've been on other podcasts before, and I feel like people, are aware of, who you are and kind of what you do. But for those who might be living under a rock, so to speak, if you wouldn't mind, give us a little bit of background about you, where you're from, what you do for a living.
Sounds good. Born and raised in Idaho, pretty much lived Idaho and Montana my whole life. And for people that don't know me or that have never been out to Idaho, Idaho's a pretty diverse state. And I live up in the northern panhandle, Idaho, where it's a huge forest land country, stuff that runs up to 10,000 feet. just the mountains are covered in timber. So it's just a sea of rugged timber, steep, rocky, but also heavily forested country up high. And then as you drop down a little lower in elevations, you get into some really nice middle ground. And I think people would call them foothills out here, but they're more like little mountains, probably to most people.
Right.
You know, we got our little mountains and our big mountains.
Yeah.
And then you get down into the valley floors of where I live, and it's just probably some of the nicest country on earth. Beautiful rivers and lake country, and it's very green, and we get a lot of precipitation out here. So this is a kind of a highly sought after. If you look up, the history of the West and where a lot of logging has taken place, it's been out in the Pacific Northwest, and North Idaho is one of those.
Mm-hmm.
Was one of those hot spots, and still a lot of logging. It's our major industry, that, and I would say now tourism, just because it's so beautiful up here. But yeah, I born and raised in northern Idaho. Spent some time in college playing football and going to school in Montana. So I really haven't really left this area. I really never wanted to move anywhere else. Just I've been able to travel and hunt whitetails all over the country and in Canada, but I think the mountains have me for the rest of my life, and I'll just visit other places. I've been a teacher for 25 years, but I also grew up a logger's son, and I learned a lot from my dad through logging and owned my own business and have for 30 years. So nice. I've kind of done both. Teaching's my great fall, winter, spring job to get me through the rough months of the winter. And I love kids and like working with the youth, and coached a lot in the past, but I've always spent a ton of time in the woods too with my own business, doing all kinds, everything from logging to farming to, I do a lot of just construction now where I help people kind of build their dreams on their property, if you will.
Right.
Anything from building their roads, house sites to food plots, everything.
Right. Yeah, that's awesome, man. I mean, yeah, I've not been to specifically where the area that you live in. I've been to western Montana and did some elk hunting there, and that country is, and I was down near the border of Idaho that's in the south there. And I know the habitat is quite different, I believe, where you're at from down there, because there it was almost like high desert, really kind of dry. Yeah. But I have a buddy who moved recently to, I think it's called Coeur d'Alene, if I'm not mistaken. If I'm pronouncing it correctly. And I know that
Coeur d'Alene, that's where I'm at.
Oh, that's where I'm at. Oh, really? Okay. Yeah. Nice.
Yeah. I live out on Lake Coeur d'Alene. I don't live in the city, but I live about 30 minutes from Coeur d'Alene.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. My buddy just actually moved from Pennsylvania to there. And this was his first, this is his first fall there. So he's, kind of chomping at the bit to, get out into the woods. And I haven't talked to him for a couple of weeks. So he's been out by now, I'm sure, but he's certainly enjoying like the fruits of the West with the hiking, the scouting, the elking, and the trout fishing and, and all the things that you guys have an opportunity, at your fingertips, which is awesome. But
yeah, it's a great place to get to hunt multiple species. And I mean, I love a whitetail buck more than anything, but elk hunting's really close right behind that. I killed a nice bull a couple weeks ago, early archery, and I've been chasing another one. I like to hunt multiple states, so I hunt eastern Washington, northern Idaho, and western Montana. I try to do that annually.
Nice.
But no, you're right. This is a pretty amazing place when it comes to diversity.
Yeah, and hopefully I'm going to make it out there next year. That's my plan, is to go out and visit him next year and do a little elk hunting, or maybe even some whitetail hunting. So if I do, we'll have to connect and have a live face-to-face chat. It'd be nice.
Yeah, I got the perfect sports bar to meet you guys
at. Perfect, awesome. We'll watch some ball and throw a few back and talk bow hunting. It'll be perfect. Perfect guy vacation for me. But
no, that'd be cool. I think you're gonna enjoy it out here with your bud.
Yeah, for sure. It's it can't be bad, man. I'm in the West. I'll be chasing critters with a bow in hand, so there's not too much could be bad. Be bad with that. But I've followed you for a little while from afar. We have a couple mutual mutual buddies. I know you're buddies with, my friend Bo out in Pittsburgh. And I believe you're buddies with another buddy of mine, Ryan Glitsky, who's like a friend of mine that I, do some scouting with and stuff like that. So I've kind of known and have followed what you've been doing from afar, so to speak, and know that, you're hunting mature bucks, number one, mountain bucks, and you're doing it in some of the most rugged areas you could possibly imagine a whitetail would live. And in some places, people probably think that whitetails don't live in those areas if people aren't familiar. Tell me a little bit about the area that you're hunting specifically, like a little bit about, the terrain, the topography, the habitat, the vegetation, the things like that, and just kind of how diverse and rugged this area is.
Well, the country that I hunt is from eastern Washington all the way across to western Montana through northern Idaho. It's pretty similar all the way across, and so are the whitetails. It's a very dense, thickly lush vegetation, ground vegetation with timber canopy that runs for hundreds of miles. So it's just a lot different than hunting, say, river bottoms or farm country where you're going to put eyes on an animal a lot. Mm-hmm. This country has such a vast security cover and a huge presence to it that I really believe it's pretty intimidating for most bow hunters when it comes to whitetails out here. And a lot of it's because the first time you ever see one of these big mature bucks is probably going to be the one chance you get at him in stand. Mm-hmm. And it's rarely ever going to be with binoculars or driving up a road. Trail cameras are extremely important to me because of how great the cover is and how vast this country is. So there's a lot of you look at it and I've had guys come out from all over the country and elk hunt with me, and most of them will say with me when they're out elk hunting with me in this big country, they're like, "You hunt whitetails here?" And I say, "Yeah." Some of my best bucks live in real close proximity and share the same ridges and saddles and mountains and clear cuts and heavily grown in clear cuts and timbered mountains with the elk, and they live at that elevation too. Wow. So yeah, it's just this. If you for your listeners, if you picture just a rugged, I mean steep, rugged mountains that are heavily timbered and heavily vegetated, tons of food, native feed for mm-hmm. elk and deer in every direction. There's no one central local food source. There's so much feed they can't eat it all. It's kind of a unique situation out here. And one thing that's helped make it that way is that we actually practice healthy forest management out in the West out here, and especially in northern Idaho, where some of the best feeding and bedding areas for the whitetails are either newer clear cuts or old ones that have grown up so thick that you can't walk through them.
Right.
And then there's a lot of big timber too that butts up against that. So just a really unique country. The mountains are not forgiving. They're rugged. They're the conditions that are part of mountain whitetail hunting. And again, I haven't rifle hunted for a deer since the 90s.
Wow.
So all I've done is bow hunted them, and all public land, do-it-yourself stuff, big country, big woods. So yeah, there's definitely some obstacles thrown at you that'll wake you up when you start diving into this. I've known a lot of guys over the years that have moved from the Midwest out here because they wanted to chase the elk dream and get into the whitetails. And the first thing they'll say to me is once they start diving into these whitetails out here, they'll say, "Troy, it is just literally a whole different ball game. I mean, where do I even start?" Is what I hear from a lot of guys, which I understand. My advantage is that I'm 51 and I've lived in this country and hunted this country, starting with my dad back when I was 5, trailing him through the woods. Right. So, it's just ingrained in me. I love every aspect. I love the challenge of it. I love the factor that it's not easy, and that we do actually have some bucks that can reach an old age because of the vastness and the ruggedness and the cover that's out here. We do, you look at a few of the bucks I've killed over the years, and I can usually target a 5, 6, or 7-year-old every year if I do my homework.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, yeah, they got plenty. I mean, they have a lot of predators, of course, right? But they also have plenty of opportunity to hide or be scarce if they're smart, especially when they start making it to that older age class. They get a little bit more experience, I guess. You know, it gives them a better opportunity to stay scarce. But there's one thing that you touched on, and you know, I like hunting big woods. It's one of my favorite things to hunt. And it's funny whenever I think of big woods because, you know, around here and a lot of what I will hunt that is, you know, big woods for around here in general would be, you know, probably anything from like 30,000 to like 100 couple thousand acres. You know what I mean? Those are probably like the lots, and probably on average, it's probably closer to like 70 to 100,000, you know, of kind of unbroken timber. And
Yeah.
that in itself, you know, is, you know, a big chunk in daunting. But what you're dealing with out there, just like the sheer vastness of that country, unless you've hunted it before, is almost unimaginable. And I know even walking into some of the big, like I took on a big piece of Big Woods Public this year to kind of break down and try to figure out, and I have a couple good deer that are there, and I'm pretty stoked on hunting it. And I know when I walked into it, I was kind of telling myself like, hey, this might be like a couple season process even to have like a, you know, where I would consider, you know, an opportunity to have some decent hunts, you know, and I was kind of full well knowing that it could be a process, and I kind of lucked out. But you're breaking down such larger chunks that are even much more intimidating than the pieces I've been kind of playing with. So how do you go about breaking down an area that's as vast as the country is that you're hunting in? So I guess let's do a scenario here. It's like, let's say you're headed to a new area. We've dropped Troy off somewhere in Idaho where he's never been, and you know that there's good mountain whitetails in there. Where do you start, and how do you start breaking down an area that's so big?
Right. Well, I've at least seen it on a map. I can promise you that.
Right.
Yeah. No, to start everything now, where I'm at with my approach nowadays is everything starts with a map, satellite imagery, and topo combined. And I've taught this in my boot camps with guys, and I show them firsthand. I literally do a split screen, and I dissect the elevations that I prefer based on decades of just learning where these whitetails like to survive with the wind and the thermals based on the size of the mountains and the elevation and the habitat. And then I break down all the topography, what makes sense, slope for certain times of the year, how hot it is out. You know, I open up August 30th and I finish December 24th. So I'm going through the 3 seasons of hunting as far as summer, fall, and winter. I get to hunt those 3 seasons. And all of these animals are driven to survive based on, you know, shelter and food and procreation. So for me, it all starts with those maps nowadays. And then when I I jump into the woods where I want to head, I've already got a heck of a game plan in my mind, specific terrain-based features, elevations, and habitat that I find by combining those maps. I've already got a really good idea where the best security cover is, the best thermal advantage, wind advantage for a buck to have everybody outplayed and to survive a lot of years. And then, of course, those terrain-based driven, you know, a funnel out here isn't anything like a funnel in Iowa. And I've hunted Iowa and I've hunted the flat ground. It's nothing like a pinch. I mean, my pinch might equate to a specific long ridge line that runs 2 miles, but because of where it's located away from roads, I'll get a lot more daylight traffic through a couple saddles than, say, the guy 2 ridges over that's too close to a road and too close to noise. He'll get a lot of nighttime traffic, and his will look just as good as mine, habitat-wise.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I dive in to a piece of ground. I've already broken it down extensively via maps. And then I go in and start looking for what I need to see as far as sign goes. And, you know, one thing that I think gets overlooked and gets misled, especially if you're a mountain bow hunter like I am, and I'm hunting several million acres.
Yeah.
Not a million, several million acres between my 3 states. I think one thing that really gets misread in the woodsmanship of being a true whitetail guy is being able to decipher the year-old, 6-month-old, 1-month-old, right now sign that can actually mean something to you even the next year if you know what you're looking for. And that's one reason why those big community scrapes for me come into play, because that type of sign is decades and decades and decades of production for a hunter. It can be. It can equate to a lot of real positive hunts over 10, 20 years if you know how to play it right. You know, it was funny you bring this up, because today on Instagram, I posted a picture of a community scrape that I've been hunting for over 20 years off of a ridge that I've taken 4 or 5 of my best whitetail bucks ever over 20 plus years, and my biggest Idaho buck ever. So
Yeah.
and I got 2 bucks there right now that are just cool bucks. I mean, they're not quite giants yet, but that place just produces, based on the aforementioned, all the different just characteristics that I just spoke about earlier.
Yeah.
That spot has everything.
Yeah.
The security cover, the feed, the elevation, the advantage for a big buck to stay alive. And when you take a big buck out of that mountain and that spot, another one will find it within a year or 2, or even within weeks, and move right in, just because of what the thermals and the wind and the cover and the feed and the water, everything's there for him.
Right.
It's to his advantage, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it totally makes sense, man. And there was a lot of stuff there to unpack as far as, you know, your approach and, you know, the things that you're kind of keying in on and stuff like that. And so the first thing I want to start with, like you mentioned this, and it's really interesting because this was something that, you know, I mean, I'm still working on a work in progress with it. And, you know, I think that's the one thing I love about bow hunting is, like, you can always get better at it. Like, even when you know certain things, you can always, you know, up your game, you know, and elevate that knowledge. And, you know, and you mentioned the woodsmanship, and I will say, you know, when I started out hunting as a kid, you know, I hunted our back 40, you know, in Pennsylvania. And it wasn't until I got older where I decided I wanted to start venturing out into bigger country and stuff like that. And, you know, and just, I wanted room to roam. I wanted room to be mobile. I wanted to be able to be aggressive and mess up on deer. And if I mess up, then I'll learn, and then I'll be better for the next setup, or whatever the case was. And that just kind of was my mentality. And it made it, painstakingly obvious that I needed to when I started hunting more big wood settings, it was obvious I needed to up my woodsmanship. Like, I knew some things, but my ability to see something and know what it meant, like in the midst of the hunt, was needed to be sharpened. And you mentioned that deciphering the sign in real time is critical when you're hunting these big places, because it's just, I'm imagining, because there's like, it doesn't come up everywhere. And so you have to really know what you're looking at. So can you kind of, I guess, talk about like deciphering, you know, how old rubs are when you're finding them, and knowing, like, is this like huntable now or not huntable now? How are you discerning that?
Well, when I go into an area, I don't even get excited about a spot unless I see a lot of traditional sign.
Mm-hmm. Even historical, like, even if you see historical sign, like you're liking that, because you're like, this place is being used, even if there's nothing that's fresh, you're looking at it going, this is historically a place where deer want to spend time.
This is what I want to see. I want to see more than just historical. I want to see traditional historical sign that shows me years and years of a big whitetail liking this area. Mm-hmm. And then I want to see right now signs saying they're still there. They're here right now. Right. But I want to, because what does that tell you about a great mature buck hideout area? That tells you that the deer will teach you everything. Mm-hmm. And I think what a lot of guys miss out on is everybody wants to jump into the latest trend, mm-hmm, or the cool new catchphrase, or dive into something that's a hot fad. But the truth is, in big woods, in big mountainous country like I hunt, The only thing that really works is what the deer show you and tell you.
Yeah.
And they'll let you know if you stop and really pay attention
Yeah.
and break down and decipher old sign, historical sign, traditional sign. I mean, I always look for trails that look like they've been there for decades.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying they're going to stand out like a sore thumb.
Yeah.
Because a trail in the mountains with a low deer density isn't going to look like anything in the river bottoms that has 50 deer traveling it all the time.
Exactly. Yeah.
Do you hear what I'm saying?
Yeah, 100%.
So I'm looking for that, and then I'm looking for those rubs and scrapes. I love finding trees that or an area that's just got all the habitat a buck needs to not have to move and hardly even move during the day. And then I'll find rubs that I can tell are 20, 30 years old, all the way up to very fresh. There's a big guy or two living in the area right now rubs. So it's putting all of those pieces together. You know, the scrapes are positioned in accordance with where the doe family groups overlap his big core area. And I put all those pieces together. Quit, you guys. Sorry, my labs are boys. Quit. Sorry about this.
That's all right. Hey, they just wanted to join. They wanted to join the fun, man. It's all right.
Oh yeah, they're playing with an antler. Boys, quit. Anyway, so back to I'm looking for all of the pieces of the puzzle of the big picture, and not just right now, and not just historical. I want to see it all because it tells me those bucks have a reason for wanting to stay there.
Right.
And there's a reason why they continue to reload in that area. If that comes across, you know, I'm looking for those bucks that like to reload those areas that get reloaded year after year after year. And it's because an old whitetail buck in those woods has everything he wants to his advantage. I also break everything down and literally walk in on my first scouting mission. Doesn't matter what month of the year it is. And I'll scout a piece of ground. I don't care what month it is. I break it all down based on how the predominant winds mix with the everyday thermals based on every slope in that country, because all the winds and thermals work a little different on slope. And I'll break all that down ahead of time, and I can pretty much pinpoint, usually within 400 or 500 yards of where a big buck's living. And then I'll go into that area for the very first time on foot and actually get to see it firsthand. And usually it comes to fruition. I'll go in there. I'll either find his big scrapes, I'll find where the does are using the area. I'll find where he's usually elevated in his position, and I'll either find a big community scrape in there or I'll place one. And within 2 or 3 days, I can usually get a good one on camera. Rarely anymore. And it used to not be this way. Mm-hmm. It took me decades of trial and error, making mistakes, striking out, to where now I just kind of go with some absolutes that I have to have. And when I do that, they show up and they're there. And I also play a biological game with them with scent. I trap whitetails. That's what I do.
Right.
I'm a trapper.
Right.
But I'm not catching them with a foothold. I'm using their biology to come to me and check me out because they think I'm a new dude in town.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, when you mentioned, and that was the big thing for me, and I think for any, bow hunter that's serious, when they start letting, the woods come to them to a degree.
Yeah.
It starts to make all the difference in the world, because you start to see things through the deer's eyes a little bit, as much as you can. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And that's when, for me, like, the big woods started making more sense, because, the hardest part, I think, for me for the longest time was, and I'm still a work in progress, and I fully admit that, was walking into like a new place. And, it's been my experience. I'm curious to, hear, what it is kind of in Idaho, but I'll go to some of these places, and I mean, the sign's not all over the place. It's almost localized, and there's just not a ton of deer. And if they are moving, they're moving in very kind of specific areas where the food is at, like, because there's just not food everywhere necessarily. In some of these places where I'm hunting, it's like some of it's almost like just like pole timber where there's like a ton of canopy, and then you'll get into pockets of where there's cuts and things like that where there's obviously where the food is, and it's very kind of localized, and you'll run into like a smattering of sign in those places. And so some of the places you would look at on the map, and that's what I had to start learning, and as I learned it, I was able to more quickly find deer, was that some of those classic places on the map that you would look at it and go, man, bet you there's deer there. But in the big woods, it's like, well, do they have all the other stuff there aside from like that terrain feature that suggests that they should be there? Because that became the more important piece, was like, how many of the variables can you get together in one place? That was where you were going to find them, because they were just traveling either they weren't traveling a whole lot because they had everything, or they were traveling such long distances, they were almost nomadic. So trying to figure out the travel route was near impossible in some cases. Do you kind of have the same experience out there?
I do, but I don't run into the more congregated food sources because the vegetation here is everywhere.
Right.
And so what I run into is I make sure the feed is there, but it's almost everywhere. Pretty much you can find really good feed if you know what slopes to check and look for. You look for the right terrain features and you find the right feed. So what I run into more is that security, that wind advantage, that security cover. And one reason I run into this more than most, and it's solely because I'm going through an SD card right now. We're sitting there talking, and I've got 5 bears on it, a mountain lion within 5 days.
Nice.
And I haven't got 10 different times a coyote or 2 have come through. So if you look at the scenario I'm dealing with heavy predation.
Yeah.
I get as many predators. I get more predators on a camera a lot of times than I do a mature buck by far. So what's the number one priority for my bucks to survive? Security, wind advantage. Not just a wind advantage for a human. I'm probably the least of their worries when it comes to a lion or a pack of wolves.
Right.
But they always have to have an advantage to stay alive when I'm hunting. I'm hunting a buck if I'm fortunate enough with my work schedule and days off to hunting max 10 days a season, 15 at the most.
Right.
And that's half day sits a lot of times because I have to go to work. But anyway, all that to say, I got this lion on camera right now at one spot, which is good for your listeners to hear. It's in there every week. And that's a lot for a mountain lion.
Yeah.
But that whitetail that's in there with him right now that I have on camera that I'm thinking about hunting, he's got to avoid that guy. Yeah. So, and not just leave and not just take off and leave 2, 3, 4 miles away, which he might. But my point is a little different when it comes to the scenario that I have to tackle. So I'm probably keyed in a little more or less on centralized food sources because my food is everywhere for the most part. And I'm keying way more in on that bulletproof security wind advantage that buck has. He's literally evolved into this survival machine that he knows where he has to be to stay alive from the predators.
Right.
And then I got to get in there. I got to infiltrate that. And I've got to be able to beat him at his game where he's beating mountain lions and wolves. I got to be able to, kill him at 15, 20 yards.
Right. You mentioned slopes and kind of understanding slopes and prevailing wind and what those thermals are going to do. And like you've played that game long enough to where like you can, basically look at a map and go, within a couple hundred yards, know where you're going to be in the ball game at. I guess give me an example of like, what direction facing slope with what prevailing wind, like how would you kind of break that down, and how do the thermals play on those different slopes?
Yeah, I get a lot of south and west winds. So when I get up high on ridges and, I'm getting in the mountains, really the only place you can get a consistent, at best consistent wind is up on a ridge. You're not going to ever get a real consistent wind out on a bench or on a big flat, because anytime you have terrain around you that's higher than you, the wind is going to bank and swirl no matter what in the mountains.
Yeah.
So I really like ridges. I like long ridges. what these big whitetails will do in this country is they will usually always position themselves at a higher elevation than any of the doe family groups to bed for the day, for the most part. Not always, but this is what I usually see for these mountain bucks. And they'll use that uphill thermal all day long to keep scent track of everything below them, especially the doe family groups. And they'll usually have, that prevailing wind. And it depends on how hot it is. If it's real hot, they'll lay in the north and they'll let that prevailing come over the north and drop onto the back of their head. And they'll lay in there and use that uphill thermal on that north side too. Mm-hmm. So they'll literally have wind direction from both directions all day long.
Yeah.
But, my point about that whole thermal change and slope change is that if I'm hunting a buck on the south side, that thermal is going to pick up a lot earlier in a morning direction uphill than it is if I'm hunting him on the north side, based on what he's doing.
Yeah.
And every buck is different. Every buck, bucks are a little different. Some bucks prefer a cooler bed and a more thick cover bed, not quite as much feed. And other bucks like to bend out around and bed a little bit more in the southwest or the southeast, just to have a little better access maybe to, an easy bite to eat. Sometimes out here in the north, it gets pretty vegetation free in the real steep norths, just straight timber and thick. Yeah. Anyway, all that to say, I'm playing every individual buck that I find and start breaking down his movement. And I run video, and I run a camera on video always, long extended video. And I always have a windicator in my video frame and that hanging in there. And then I always run a scrape, and then I always run a picture camera too at a high elevated position on a good buck. That way I can gather a lot of info on, what winds he likes to come in on, what thermals he likes to ascend or descend on, how he likes to approach his core bedding area or hideout area, and then how he's approaching my setup. And I always involve a mock or a natural scrape in it.
Right. Man, that windicator is a slick move, man, because, just looking through trail camera data, and I'll use different, programs or whatever to kind of to pull in, data to kind of, I guess, wind map the deer and their travel, and I'll aggregate them and things like that. But you and I both know, I've walked into a place plenty of times that I was unfamiliar with a prevailing wind, and kind of all right, my thermal's going to do this, my prevailing is this, and I walk in and the wind is doing completely the opposite of what you would think it was supposed to do in that area,
Exactly.
And so,
and that's why I run those windicators, because when you walk in and you've read what the prevailing is, you're sitting there looking on your phone, and the prevailing says one thing, but you've got mountainous country, banking winds. You got to walk in and break it all down based on what that actual spot affords you, what it really does in there. So there's times where I'll walk in and it's a west wind or a south wind like normal, but at that specific spot, based on everything, all the terrain around me, I'll have to say, okay, this is what a west wind does to this spot. Well, I actually get a push out of the south because how it banks, or vice versa. And then I combined the thermal push. And I get some pretty heavy thermal pushes in this country that a lot of times will literally, they'll strong arm the prevailing if the prevailing isn't 7 or 8 miles an hour or more.
Yeah.
So I deal with all that. I break all that down. But the key is having that target deer rolling in, say he's checking one of my scrapes. I've got that windicator in my view in the video, and I'm watching him very closely how he approaches that based on what the actual wind is doing right there.
Right.
And then I can cross-reference that back here at home and say, that was a southwest prevailing wind that day, and that's how the wind was working that day. Right. So then I know that for a future hunt if I'm going to go try to kill him there.
Yeah. No, it's such a good idea. It's something I'm going to actually start doing. It's funny you mentioned about, how in some areas that thermal will just kind of drive the wind, and it was a happy kind of accident to a degree. It worked out in my favor, actually. This past weekend, I was hunting, and I was actually hunting close to some water. And especially in the morning, I didn't kind of account for it. We had a pretty good temp drop, and I was hunting close to water. And so the air temperature was kind of cooler, and that the water isn't real deep. And so it didn't have a whole lot of time to necessarily cool off, relative to the ambient air temperature. And so when I set up, I was like, man, I'm going to have a really iffy wind here, and I'll probably work for about the first 3 hours of the morning, and I probably got to get out of here. And as I was sitting there dropping milkweed, I could feel the wind, what was supposed to be my prevailing. I'm like, man, that's not the prevailing. I'm just paying attention to my milkweed. It was just sucking toward that water to where that water was drawing. The thermal pool was headed toward that water. It was actually keeping me safer than I had anticipated being. It was just one of those things that I don't think that'll play out for me in that position all season. But for early season, it was a good learning before the temperatures and the water really gets a chance to cool. It's like I can probably cheat the wind a little bit more in that location than I typically would be able to. So
yeah, absolutely. I use a lot of water. I use a lot of creeks, creeks and steep banks, and I'll set up on the edge because I'll get that really nice thermal suck off that creek in the mornings a little longer than I normally would get away with it, and it protects me more.
Yeah.
And there's times too where I have to, I'll usually know where my buck's probably going to come from outside of the crazy part of the rut. But usually I'll know where he's entering and wanting to check me or check my setup out. And if that wind doesn't do what I need it to, and if it starts getting towards his bedding or his travel corridor towards me, I've bailed more than once on a big deer and turned around and killed him 3 or 4 days later or a month later just because of it.
Yeah, no, makes sense. You mentioned elevation, man. Is there a specific, and you said that, you'll have bucks that want to live in the same elevation and the same country as elk and things of that nature. Is there a specific elevation where you find kind of like the sweet spot, or is it really, it could be anywhere along that mountain?
I get asked this a lot, and what I've seen over the years is it depends on the elevation of the mountain itself and how big that mountain is and what it gives the animal.
Right.
If I'm hunting what I call low country mountain whitetails, 4,000 feet max, then a lot of times I'm getting on my best bucks at that top third elevation always. And it's just because the thermals and the prevailing winds really work well for them if they're up higher. But when I get into the big country, 7,000, 8,000, 9,000 foot country, then I really like my sweet spot. I've done really well of finding really nice mature bucks that have survived, usually a minimum of 3,800 feet or higher. And I like 5,000 feet outside of bitter cold, rut hunting when the doe family groups are lower. But outside of that, as long as there's not 2 feet of snow on the ground, I've done really well around 5,000 feet, 4,800, 42, 46, any of those 40s and up to 5. I've just found that a lot of old hermit bucks, when they get old and 5, 6, 7 years old and want to kind of be to themselves, they'll usually end up in a hideout like that that's got some elevation to it. And it gets them away from, definitely gets them away from a lot of humans, especially when there's snow, because it's a lot of work to work uphill, to get in on these animals.
Yeah.
And if there's not a logging road across the top of these mountains, which a lot of them they don't run roads across the top of a lot of them because they're way too rugged. A lot of times I'm finding myself going uphill to get up in where a big boy's hanging out and he's been living and surviving for years. And, he's got the thermals at his advantage. The predators often are down working on the weaker and easier to kill animals. So that's what I see. That's what I experience.
Yeah, and that's interesting. You brought up a point that I wanted to ask was just access, because knowing that, you're headed up a lot, you know what I mean? It's like, which, depending on, for a morning might not be so bad before the thermals start kind of moving up, but anything that you would do in the evening, like that's got to be rough on the access or even rough on the exit if you're kind of, as you're kind of getting out in the afternoon or getting out in the evening, or if you hunt in the morning, and you want to get out, like that thermal's rising up the hill. It's like, I'm sure access is kind of probably a pain in the rear end.
Well, I play that game. I've got that figured out. And the way to beat that is you always have to come in lateral elevation of your target.
Yeah.
You never come in underneath, never come in above. You always come in from the side, and I usually come in from the east on most of my big bucks. My access usually is from the east. My setups are usually almost always set out to the east of my big bucks. I'm setting up I'm either setting up on a traditional long-standing community scrape that these bucks have used forever, or I've created one that kind of shocks them that I'm so close proximity to their, favorite place to hide and survive, that they literally, it drives them nuts that I'm there and they haven't seen me yet. So, but as far as access goes, I've done really well coming in lateral elevation. So I'll get to the elevation I need to from a far off distance, and then I'll work my way laterally, side hilling or whatever I got to do to get out across, slide into a stand where I've got some terrain-based features that pretty much put me kind of on a wind edge or a corner of where that big deer likes the daylight.
Okay, and that's
sense. All. Yeah, that's all. That's a lot of work. That's a lot of detailed scouting, and a lot of times I raise my bucks on my scrapes for 2 or 3 years, meaning I'm conditioning them from when they're 2 or 3 years old. They get to 5 or 6, they feel pretty safe in there because I haven't shot at them or spooked them.
Right. Yeah, it makes sense that you're coming in from the east and setting up in the east corner, especially if you get a lot of prevailing westerly winds, right? Because that
a lot of west, a lot of south, quite a bit of south, but I get more west than anything off the Pacific Ocean.
Yeah, it's interesting. Makes sense though. I mean, I know that you will, like you said, you have these deer and you start to condition them over these scrapes, and you're targeting the most mature deer that you have to hunt. And you're a lot of times targeting a specific deer, not just a mature deer, but a very specific one, and that's typically hard enough to do in general, anywhere, without adding in all the rugged terrain and the predators and stuff like that we've already talked about. How do you go about kind of, I don't want to say selecting, but finding that particular deer that you want to hunt that trips your trigger? I mean, is there, what exactly are you looking for? You're looking for age class, obviously killable, or if you're having something that's maybe not showing himself in daylight, or does he still make the hit list potentially? You just figure out where he's daylighting and go from there, or are you looking for one that's already kind of showing you that there's an opportunity to kill this deer?
Well, number one, there's just certain deer that I want. I'll be honest, I want to kill the biggest deer in the mountains. Right. There's guys that may not want to hear that, but the truth is, I want to go try to find the biggest whitetail, oldest whitetail that I can find in the woods, and that's who I want to hunt. And I get excited about, and age is, I want to back up. Age is extremely important to me. Mm-hmm. I've had bucks that were in the 160s at 4.5, and I did not hunt them on purpose. I actually had a buck that was 170 at 4.5, and on purpose wouldn't hunt him, and my son said I was crazy. But I also knew that buck had a chance to be a once in a lifetime possible 200-inch buck one day. So, I don't come across those very often in the public land big woods. So when I come across a rarity like that, then I'm going to let a rarity probably walk more than a great aged. Like the buck I killed last year was just an awesome old 6.5-year-old big 4x4. Mm-hmm. And I don't shoot a lot of 4x4s anymore. A lot of 4x4s I let go because I am on a 5 or a 6x6 or a 5x5 or a non-typical. Right. So all that to say, this buck came in last year, and it was about the age, and it was about what a beast he was, and I didn't give a crap what he scored, and he actually scored great for a 4x4, but I absolutely love that deer. I mean, he had a 26-inch neck.
Jeez.
He was just a freaking monster mountain buck, which when I killed him and got him to the taxidermist, and they told me, I said, Troy, that freaking deer you killed is a monster, just a body big buck. That's what got to me when he came in. I was looking at him and I was like, damn, that is a toad. So did I care one bit on him what he scored? No. He was a beast, and he ended up scoring really well for a 4x4, but it had no impact on me. I knew he had the age. Right. I could see it in his chest, his brisket, his face, long nose. I knew he was a horse. Yeah. On the other hand, I'm always looking for a giant. Always. Right. That's what gets me excited is, there's a lot of giants in other states. There's not a lot of giants in the mountains. There's a few. And for me, I like chasing that rarity, that really hard to kill combination of old hermit survivor plus his headgear is pretty amazing.
Right.
That gets me fired up. I like how our big mountain bucks in this country actually, I don't know if you've ever looked at any of the bucks I've killed, but carry good mass.
Oh yeah.
A lot of my bucks, I'm hunting bucks that have the same strain of genetics as the Canadian bucks right above me.
Right. Yeah.
I've hunted some bucks that have been on both sides of the border.
Wow. Yeah.
So I love that big, heavy, chocolate, dark rack, just big bodies too. Our whitetails out here in the mountains, the ones that make it, the genetics have been passed on over the century or the decades, at least centuries probably, that have allowed the bigger bodies make it. The DNA that's big and strong and can handle the harsh winters, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 feet of snow in the high country they got to escape from, and they have to migrate, and then they got to move back up in elevation. Those genetics are out there. We just don't have big numbers. Some of my bucks will travel 10 miles in a day during the rut just to check on a few doe family groups. And that's proven by trail camera pictures that buddies and I have shared over the years, 10 miles apart. We'll get a buck in 24 hours, go 10 miles.
Jeez.
Yeah. Which is just incredible. And I wouldn't know that if I hadn't shared some trail camera pictures with some buddies of mine that are really good whitetail hunters too, but we stay away from each other enough to where we're not on top of each other, but we're willing to share, hey, this buck's still alive type of thing.
Yeah.
But no, all that to say, I like big deer. I do. I think what else you said? I like those big monster whitetails that are 250, 275 on the hoof.
Yeah.
And packing a cage with them too. There's just nothing like them.
Yeah.
There's nothing like them to me. I mean, it's just a different level of whitetails when you run into something that tremendous out here in these mountains.
Yeah, man. It's, and again, I'm not hunting the same type of mountains that you're hunting, but for the mountains that I do get to hunt, in the bigger pieces of timber, it's when you see that big mountain buck and you get, a trail camera image of him and just know that he's alive. And you're like, I don't know. It just fires you up, cause it's just, they're the hardiest of the hardiest, in their territory. Like they're the king of the jungle, if you will, and
they're a hell of a survivor is what they are. They blow it. I have so much respect for them. They beat me more than I beat them.
Yeah, for sure. And it's just the opportunity to battle wits with them is just the part that I just dig it. It's just, and sometimes, I talk about this too. It's, at least where I'm at in my journey of hunting, mature mountain deer, is that if I can battle wits and get within range, I maybe don't even get my bow pulled back, but I beat him, and I just didn't get the shot opportunity. Like I'm like, okay, I won that round. I didn't win the war, but I won the battle. It's like I was there, he was there where he was supposed to be. He did everything he was supposed to do. I just didn't get the shot opportunity because there was a piece of brush or whatever it was, and I leave going, all right, I'm chipping away, I'm chopping wood, and that's just the cool part is like doing just the chess match with them. But, I wanted to ask you, when you find a buck and you kind of, well, I guess 2-part question. It sounds to me like you, and correct me if I'm wrong, and I've never heard you say this, I'm just kind of guessing, like you probably prefer to hunt these deer, sometime in like October before they really get moving in the rut because they travel such long distances and probably becomes a little bit more of a challenge and, becomes more difficult when that happens. So that's the first part. Is that true? And then when you find a hidey hole that a buck is living in, will he stay there consistently because of just like the ruggedness and like the predation that he's going to face and stuff like that? Like if he finds like a sanctuary that he's going to basically be, you can almost bank on him being there.
Okay. First part, I like all phases.
Okay.
One thing I take great pride in is I've killed a lot of bucks very evenly throughout every month. And that's something that's been very important to me. I don't know, there's 40 some whitetail bucks downstairs. And 35 or of them are worth a bow and arrow or more. I'd have to go count. But even growing up, I always wanted to be really good at this every month of the season, not just, I'm not a rut hunter, I'm not an early season guy special. I just want to be really damn good at it no matter what month. And if you go, and you know, I have guys out here from my boot camp, and I'll go downstairs, and when I do the math and I lay them all out, it's pretty even. You know, I've got some great August 30th to middle September bucks. I've got some great early October, middle October bucks. I've got some great early November bucks. I've got some tremendous late November bucks and some awesome December bucks. And that's something that I've always taken pride in is I like the challenge of how the game changes and being on top of that, being ahead of it versus behind that, you know, being behind the 8 ball on that. So I'm always trying to be a step ahead of every big deer I'm trying to kill, because the truth is I'm probably going to get one daylight opportunity to kill him, and I got to make it happen.
Right.
And I really try to, it's very important to me when that opportunity comes to get it done. So as far as having one specific time that really helps me kill a specific buck, yeah, the rut can be a pain in the ass when it comes to that.
Yeah.
But if you really have your does documented and you have the dates of when the buck you're trying to kill is on a certain doe group, he'll almost always be there the next year in that same drainage.
Yeah.
So I'll jump around on doe groups during the rut based on a buck I'm trying to kill, based on info I have on him for several years, and info I had on him when he was 3 and 4, when he was a great deer, but I didn't want to kill him. I just stacking info on.
Yeah, because those doe groups their ester states will, like those doe fawns they share the same ester states. They pass them on to their doe fawns, and so that makes sense.
Those mature does especially will be very close every year to their same date. You know, and growing up, I learned to date my does young. I started dating does young, meaning I'd write down the dates I'd see a big mature buck on them, and if that same doe stayed alive the next year, I could almost guarantee within a 2 or 3 day window of that same date, she'd be an estrus the next year. And I've seen that a lot. I've watched that a lot. I've got a whitetail buck right now. Literally, when we're talking, I was looking at a SD card of him. The buck I really want to kill this year. For 3 years in a row now, he has been on the same doe family group within a 5-day window in the mountains every year. Same doe family group, and that old doe is still alive. I need her to stay alive. You know,
Right.
I need her to be there this year and not get killed by a lion or a wolf. But what's incredible about this buck, and I think your listeners will appreciate this, I get him 6 miles away 2 weeks later every year.
Wow.
At a different doe family group in a different drainage. So the whole point of that rut hunting him is I'm going to hunt one drainage early November for him. And then later in November, about Thanksgiving, he moves over a drainage and he services a bunch of does in that next drainage over. So my point is, that's an incredible, just exciting game to play too when you're playing a game like that.
Yeah.
And my son's killed a couple big ones. Literally, we killed them on community scrapes that does live on, and we knew in his bucks. My son's 2 biggest mountain whitetails. He's got a 150 some class and a 160 class, 65. And, you know, he's 18 years old in college now, but he's killed a couple monsters with me. But both of his bucks, we had those bucks dialed timing-wise every year where they would be in what community scrape they would be checking for 4 or 5 day window.
Yeah. Yeah, man.
And it wasn't their hideout, home range spot that we were trying to kill them in an early season. I mean, it was miles away during the rut. So I like it all.
Right.
If I had to pick, and this might be helpful to you to answer your question. If you said, Troy, you get 1 month to kill the best buck of your life, and you only get 1 month to hunt him in, what month would you pick? This might surprise you, but if he can make it, I really like early December, the first 6-7 days of December.
Why is that?
That's because out here, that's the tail end of our rut. And that's when the biggest bucks, a lot of whitetail hunters give up by then or have tagged out and they're done.
Yeah.
And the snow is a pain in the ass and it's deep and you're chaining up. But these big bucks are still going to take care of their doe family groups into about the 9th or 10th of December every year. So what happens is the human pressure subsides a little bit. These old bucks, and I've watched them do it year after year, that first, second week of December, they start to, well, they're wore out, they're tired, they're beat up, and mentally they're wore out. In my opinion, they're a little more susceptible to a mistake. It's a little easier to get in on them when there's not as many rigs in the mountains driving around, making noise, and, letting them know here comes the hunting army. I feel like it's a combination of factors. They're hungry, they're tired, they're wore out. I believe they make more mistakes, but they'll still check those scrapes and they'll still make sure every last doe is covered. And a lot of times, my biggest, most hermit-like, very nocturnal bucks that choose not to do anything till nighttime, literally won't do anything till nighttime. They'll play it that safe.
Wow.
They'll just lay in their bed. They'll just stay put. And trust me, I'll be set up close to them to where they just time it by the dark. As soon as it's half hour after dark, they'll go rut all night, and then they'll beat feet back because I'll pick them up on 2 or 3 community scrapes that I have set up in a drainage. 3 and 4 miles, they'll do a big round through the night, go do their thing, and if they get on a doe, they stay. But if they don't, they'll get back to their bed, and I'll pick them up ascending to their bed 4 o'clock in the morning or 5, and they'll get settled in for the day, and they'll just hold tight. Well, what happens in that late season, the tail end of the rut, last few does, I'll see them throw caution to the wind just a little bit more to move in daylight. And that's all I'm looking for is that daylight movement,
Yeah.
Are they more skittish? Sometimes, yeah, but they're wore out too.
Yeah.
And I really feel like they're so wore out that a lot of times they'll make that mistake. And I've caught some dandies early December. I mean, some old guys. My oldest bucks I've ever killed have all been late November, early December, or September 1st, right around the 1st. So it's a little give or take.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting.
And then what was the second part of your question?
The second part was you started kind of getting there a little bit, but when you find a buck's hidey hole, like his bedroom or whatever, do you find that they are pretty consistent with that particular bed or that particular bedroom, if you will, if not a specific bed that, once they find something that they like, that's going to give them that security cover that they want to stay away from predation and so forth, and they got the wind at their advantage, are they pretty consistent in that hidey hole? Or do you find that, because I know, like for me, for example, and these mountains aren't nearly as big, so it's probably different, but, they might have a bedroom. It might be a couple acres or whatever the case might be, but they might kind of, wind shift around like the ridge or in different kind of areas based on what the wind is going to do, because they just don't have enough security in that one place, and there's like wind-based bedding or whatever the case is. But do you find, like where you're at, because it's, when they find like a spot that works for them, are they less inclined to leave it, I guess is what I'm asking.
First off, all of my old deer have a pattern, or the older bucks, they have that summer bedding based on feed, heat, trying to avoid heat, get water. I mean, we out here in the West, we burn up with forest fires. We have drought. I mean, it's a pain in the ass in August, September. Once we get the rains and all the hunters start hunting, and the elk hunters are in the woods and the whitetail hunters are in the woods right now, my bucks all relocate to a better preferred security area to where they're not getting bothered as much by humans. Mm-hmm. And then October rolls around and the rut starts coming. And at the end of October, they really start picking up their movement and range every day of how far they'll move, and start checking on early does and all that. Then their beds completely can change. Will they travel all the way back in October to a really good bedding security area. Yeah. And a lot of my areas are 70, 80, 100, 200 acre area where they want to bed on one side of the ridge one day they can, or bed on the other side, or they can move around, and one reason they do that, and I believe they do that, is they don't want to just sit in one bed every day. That doesn't work with predators.
Mm-hmm.
You're a sitting duck if you just sit in one spot every day. But what they'll have out here is a bedding zone that they like.
Got it.
For a specific time of the year, dependent upon heat, food, water, and of course the rut coming.
Yeah.
Once the rut hits, what my bucks do is they camp out in different spots based on doe family groups that they want to service. They'll camp out, and if I get a buck that's I call him a homebody, he'll pretty much just service the does in his area, and he'll come back to a real sound bedding zone. But I also get those bucks that are big roamers,
mm-hmm.
and they'll literally go camp out in different areas to service does. And then once that slows way down early December, then he'll probably come back to his most preferred safe zone, if you will.
Right.
So some of it depends on a buck's personality, his demeanor, and then obviously what kind of pressure he gets in a specific area that year. I had a buck a couple years ago that loved his bedding zone so much that he wouldn't hardly leave it. And I had him on camera till there was 2 feet of snow before he'd leave. He was the last deer to leave the mountain in January, but he wouldn't hardly leave it just because he was so safe there.
Wow.
And I tried to kill him in there, and I actually screwed that up. I should have killed that deer, and I screwed it up on the last day of the season when he thought it was all over. He came right down through my scrape and walked right through it, thinking there was nobody in the woods but me and him. And I tried to outsmart him and catch him at a different spot that he had been frequenting that week a little bit in the daylight. And he either had me totally patterned and I didn't know it, or I flat out screwed it up and should have stuck with my best spot, if
Right.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
But he was one of those deer that really held tight to that spot from August till December. Other bucks don't. Some of them do, some of them don't. I don't know if that answers your question very well, but it is in part their demeanor and what kind of if they're real nomadic or if they like staying home.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. And that's I would say it's probably pretty consistent with some of the bigger woods pieces, or mountain areas that I've hunted. Where it's like you'll definitely get those homebodies that want to kind of stick around, and then there's ones where you see them in August, and maybe early September, and then you don't see them again until December on camera, like in a similar location. You might get them, 10 miles away or 3 miles away or however far they end up traveling when they transition or whatever the case is. But, they're not spending any time really, except I have seen the ones that leave that will make one kind of sachet through, like the second week of November, where they almost like, all right, I've kind of checked out all my does like in my fall range. I'm going to come back to my old haunt of the summer and check those does real quick. So I've seen that, and it's funny because like I've heard, I think it was Don Higgins talk a little bit about that. I think he calls it like coming home or whatever, where like those big mature deer, it's like once they kind of finish their breeding cycles in their fall range, they'll make one kind of loop, and it's usually like the second week in November back through like their summer range and just kind of make a run through and see if they can root out any does to breed.
Yeah, and those old bucks know where every doe family group is for miles.
Yeah, exactly.
When they got that many years on them, and we're talking, when you're asking me these questions, base everything on a 5-year-old deer and older.
Yeah.
My 3 and 4-year-old bucks are like teenage boys. So there you go.
Right.
They'll run all over Hell's Half Acre to try to get lucky.
Right.
And a lot of times, as soon as it gets serious with the doe, they get bumped and they got to move on because the big dog rolls in and takes care of business.
Right.
And I see that a lot. I see that a lot on my cameras. Yeah. And I see that a lot at my stands. And late November is really good here. That's our heavy breeding time, is late November.
Okay.
And that's when I'll catch a hermit buck that's very nocturnal in his daily movements in the daylight, because he's, it's late. It's again, I definitely run into some help when the conditions get rugged and nasty when it comes to snow and hard to get to places. That does help.
Right. Yeah. So I want to transition now, man. You've mentioned primary scrapes, or community scrapes a couple times, and we've referenced mock scrapes in your setup. So I want to start with just regular scrapes and how you hunt them and how you use them, and then I want to transition after that into talking about your mock scrape kind of approach, because I know you have a very specific approach to how you like to use them and how you like to set them up. So let's start with just kind of community scrapes in general. How are you using these for either pinpointing an area or understanding that one, it is a primary scrape or a community scrape, and how are you using it as part of your hunting strategy?
Okay, first, I think to be fair to the listeners, because there's so much verbiage out there
Yeah.
in the world about scrapes, that what one guy might think is a community or a primary isn't even close to the same, or they're exactly the same. So for me, and I've been a community guy for forever. I mean, before I even think people said community scrapes,
Right.
I was talking about. And what I mean is the entire drainage, big areas. My areas are huge. I might have a drainage that runs 15 miles long, but that entire drainage will have some specific sites, scrapes in it, that every deer in that drainage that travels that drainage, they'll know where that scrape is. So what I'm targeting is a social hub scrape that every deer in the local drainage area has either, all the does have taught their fawns about, where it's at, and they won't always live right next to it, but they'll know where it's at.
Mm-hmm.
And every buck in the local drainage in that area will know exactly where it's at. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that my deer densities are lower.
Mm-hmm.
And deer travel. It doesn't bother a mountain deer to travel 2 or 3 miles as nothing. That's
Right.
just a hop, skip, and a jump for them. So a community scrape for me is where when I put a camera on it, or if I find one, I'll literally get every deer in that drainage within a 2 weeks period of time, at least checking it once or twice. And the deer that are bedded closer to it will often check it daily, especially the doe family groups.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my definition of a communal scrape versus just rut frenzied scrape, or a scrape laid down on a logged road just because the testosterone's high.
Right.
It doesn't get checked regularly, and it hasn't been there. A community scrapes has been established for decades a lot of times.
Yeah, I always kind of refer to them as like the barbershop of the town.
They are the hub.
Yeah.
They are the hub, and every young deer has been taught by the older deer where they're at.
Yeah, and are there character? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, are there characteristics that you specifically seek out that define that? Like multiple licking branches. Location.
Yeah. And I've talked about that a lot. When I walk up on one, a lot of times I can get on a map, go into an area, and locate it. If I spend enough time boots on the ground, I'll find it. But what I'll run into is multiple licking branches, years and years of abuse to the licking branches. I mean, and that's something that 99% of the hunters walk right by and don't even know it was there.
Yep.
But my eyes are always, eye level licking branches. I can see a licking branch 40 yards away, 50 yards away in the woods. And
Nice.
It's just because it's such a gold mine to me, and it always has been.
Yeah.
And you'll see all the sign. Most of the time at these community scrapes, you'll have terrain that has driven the traffic there, without the animals even knowing it. And the wind is usually always good at one of these spots. And it's the security cover is always good. I mean, I never find these things out in the open where a rifle hunter could pick deer off at. It's always in good cover, terrain-based driven. A lot of animals are cruising through there anyway, so why not have one there? It's an easy communication post that's in good cover. And then as far as the licking branches, there'll be multiple. Sometimes there'll be 3 or 4 or 5 giant scrapes in a cluster.
Mm-hmm.
And when I say giant, car hood size.
Yeah.
I've got a couple of spots like that that just blow your mind. And they produce deer year after year after year because every deer in the damn drainage knows where it's at, and they know they need to go check it, especially during the rut.
Yeah.
So all that to say, yeah, I'm looking for that detailed licking branch that shows all the decades of use. The dirt below it will show depth in the scrape where it's been pawed and worked for so many years that there's actually some depth to it instead of just on top of the flat ground. They'll be wore out pretty good. And I'm not saying they're dug out deep, but a lot of times they'll be an inch or two deeper than all the ground around it.
Yeah, you can just almost see like it's a little like satellite dish, like, concaveness to it. You know what I mean?
There's some concave to it. When I find them, I'll get down in a push-up position and smell them. And even in the spring, there's residual urine in the ground and scent because urine crystallizes.
Yeah.
And then the licking branches will just be beat to heck. And lots of vertical hanging licking branches. They've been pulled on and chewed on and twisted and worked for so many years that a lot of them are hanging straight vertical to the ground. And I've got one spot right now that I found, a place where Ty killed the second best buck ever. That community scrape might be the prettiest sight that I've ever walked up on in my life when it comes to a scrape. And I found it in the spring shed hunting, and I knew I needed to check that ridge, and I knew that the deer were using that security cover on that ridge to move laterally, based on what was around it and based on the hunting pressure around it. And sure enough, the scrapes were right where they were supposed to be, and there's like 6 of them there, and they're all within a 20-yard cluster. And I run video. Anybody's ever looked at my YouTube? I don't ever post anything that I'm trying to hunt right now, but I'll post all the past stuff.
Yeah.
And that YouTube channel of mine has that scrape cluster on it, and it's just unbelievable the traffic that spot gets. When the deer aren't migrated away from April to December, that communal scraping area, it just gets pounded from April to December. The licking branches get worked all the way through all those months.
Yeah. Do you find that, and maybe not for all of them, like one thing that I've noticed, at least for me in some of the areas that I hunt, like a lot of times I'll come across a scrape when I'm scouting and I'll look at it and go, all right, everything looks right as far as like plenty of travel. It's close to cover. It's close to what I feel is bedding, or I've verified that I've found beds and it's close to that. And everything feels right for a community scrape and licking branches, the whole nine. One of the things that I've found early, at least if it's a new spot to me, that say, like, for example, that'll a lot of times just kind of help verify it, is I'll start to get activity on it like during the summer, or like it'll start, like you mentioned, like April, and it just kind of continues where it's like it might peter out a little bit in June or July or something like that, but there's always deer activity on it, even when they're not pawing the ground, that they're still communicating with it. When I find those, that's when I'm like, all right, I found like a hub, like they're using it year round. This is the spot.
Yeah. You want to look for 2 things, and you nailed one of them. You should have activity daily or every other day minimum. But number 2, I don't even get excited if it's not daylight. Daylight in August or daylight in April, all the way through. Got to have some daylight activity, which tells me that the whitetails are really comfortable with daylighting there. And when you start getting the oldest whitetail buck in that local area, hitting it in the daylight in the summer and into the fall, and checking it in the daylight, then you're in a gold mine spot. And those aren't always easy to find, because once the hunting pressure hits, some of those great communal scrapes go to nighttime only visits.
Yeah.
They'll still communicate there. They'll still let every deer in the woods know they're around, but it's all nighttime. Yeah. So I'm really targeting daylight specific areas that deer feel so comfortable and they feel unhunted there that they'll daylight it.
Yeah. A question for you.
And that's where I place my mocks.
Yeah, and I want to jump into that here in a second. I wanted to ask you a question, and this is kind of a personal question for my own edification. But, I have an area that I know is a community scrape. I have deer hit it all year round, all through the summer, daylight. It'll have, like right now, I actually have a cell camera on it because I watch it. It's a kind of hard to access area, and so I don't mess with it until I know that the time's right. It's like I leave it alone until I know that I have an opportunity to try to kill. Now I'm getting daily activity on it in the morning, in daylight, some subordinate bucks, some like younger bucks. I'll see like what I will kind of assume to be bigger, more mature deer. Usually they'll hit it a couple times in the summer as they're kind of filling out, and then they'll kind of disappear. And then they'll show back up right around like October 15th, 16th, or like, between the like 16th and like 21st. Like that's whenever I'll finally like get like the mature bucks, like the big boys will start showing up in daylight around that time frame, at least for the first time. They'll show themselves. Do you see anything similar to that, or how would you classify this scrape I'm kind of describing to you? Like, do you think it's a high priority place, or do you think it might be just, the fact that I live in Pennsylvania with a ton of hunters and a lot of hunting pressure, that it's a community scrape, but they're probably a little bit more cautious about how they approach it. I mean, they're approaching it in daylight, so that's good, but they might be kind of checking it from afar and then kind of diving in when they know the timing's getting to be about right.
Yeah, I'd say a couple things come to mind. When I get spots like that, and I know you guys get a ton of pressure, but what I would tell you if I was like out there with you and said, you want to hunt this or not? I think you're too far away from any of your big mature bucks at that spot. But they're going to come to you in the rut because you have the goods there.
Yeah.
And that's what you're seeing. They're starting to check those doe family groups at that scrape on purpose in mid-October. That's when they're starting to show up.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, that scrape that you're on right there is a good, solid rut hunting scrape over does, if that's all you got. Right. What I do in my game is I take my game to the big buck that's by himself. I take it at him.
Right.
So what I do is I take that concept of this community scrape and I figure out, based on my scouting intel, my cameras, everything, where he's most likely bedded in his zone, specific to the month, where he's hiding out. And I move right in to his wind and his face, and I lay one down on him, and I basically build a trap to get him to elicit daylight movement right out of his bed. Right. So really, truthfully, I'm a whitetail big buck bed hunter almost year round, minus those couple weeks where I would hunt a scrape like you're hunting, because I know he'll come in there in the daylight too. Now, if I've had big whitetails, old mature bucks that will only hit those great doe spots like I referenced earlier, he'll wait till night just to stay alive and be careful.
Right.
So I move at him, and I take the community scrape, I take that concept, and I put it right in his face. Yeah. And he can't deny the scent. And I put multiple deer profiles in it. Usually what happens with me and my big deer when I make a move on him to kill him, because I'm not getting him daylight enough and I move at him, he will come into that build within a day or two, because I'm using the wind and the thermals to push it right to his face on purpose. I've got all that, that stuff's broken down and deciphered. I know that scent's getting to his face. So all that to say, he'll roll in and check it out. And I've got oodles of video, just numerous videos of these bigger, older age class bucks, 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old bucks. First time ever checking it within a day or two of me. Sometimes it's the next day. Sometimes it's 24 hours.
Yeah.
But he'll check it, and he'll literally walk circles around it, just bobbing his head, scent checking it all, and he'll act like, and I know guys have heard me say this on podcasts before, but it's incredible to watch. He'll literally act like, how in the hell did I miss this? What's going on here? How am I missing this? And what's nice about those is immediately the younger bucks in the area, even from further away, and my does in the area, even if they're down elevation, they'll come up and immediately overtake it for me. So then it just puts him into then he starts smelling deer that he already knows, plus these new deer that he doesn't know yet, but he's trying to figure out what's going on here and how did I miss this. He gets more intrigued by it, and he'll scent check it in the daylight more frequently. And that's that's the game I play on them old bucks when they're really hard to get to move in the daylight.
Yeah, so that's a perfect kind of transition into, because now the next thing is like, I know you're kind of all up in their business in your almost like you're saying earlier, you're trapping whitetails, but you're not using not using a trap, right?
Yeah.
How are you making this mock scrape now? Because now it's like I get it now. It's like if you've got something that's close by, it's like you want to push it into his bedroom and just kind of rile him up. How are you actually going about physically making the mock scrape? What is your process or approach for that? Like I guess let's start at the beginning and just say like, when do you start making mock scrapes? Like, is that something you do in the fall? Is it the summer? Like, when do you actually start placing them?
So it all depends on the scenario. I make several in the spring and summer based on what I come across scouting, and I read that sign. And there's times in February and March I'll place one because I know I need one there, and I let it start working for me right then.
Okay.
And then there's also times where I'll put one in a big buck space that I'm not getting daylight enough at a different location in October or November. I don't care what month it is.
Mm-hmm.
Does not matter to me. If there needs to be a mock scrape there for potential kill of a big mountain whitetail that I know is in the area, it could be based on a big shed find. It could be based on years of knowledge of this deer and I'm not getting on him close enough. I'll put it down any month of the year because the thing or the concept is a lot different than I think a lot of hunters hunt by. A communal scrape works year round for decades. So I mimic that. I throw that at these big whitetails, and they literally, like I said before, are perplexed at why they didn't come across that in their territory before. So it doesn't matter to me what time of the year. I'm never, I've heard guys say, well, is it too, I get this all the time. Troy, is it too late for me to go make these scrapes? Hell no. Go be aggressive and get in the game with a deer and quit hoping that he's going to show up in the daylight when he's never daylight for you, or he's once a week. I am a very aggressive hunter that way because I don't want to waste my sits. I only have so many times I can go hunt a buck.
Yeah.
In 5 years when I'm retired and can hunt every day of the year, then, I don't know. I'll probably always be aggressive because it works.
Right.
But I also am very detailed. You asked, how I build these and when and why. It's all based on every different given scenario that I'm facing. I'm ready. I'm flexible for any scenario that comes at me. So I'm always ready. I always have my kit. I'm always ready to roll with it. And it's simple biology if you really break it down. I'm placing new deer in a old mature buck's nose that he doesn't know, but they're there. The scent doesn't spook him. They always come to it. What's incredible about the synthetics that I use, the buck fever synthetics, I've never once ever watched a whitetail buck of mine or doe spook from my scrapes. Ever. Never seen it. Never. But I'm also extremely detailed. I cut no corners. I've taken younger guys out in the woods with me and showed them some stuff, and I swear to God they're bored because I'm so detailed it drives them nuts.
That's
literally,
yeah.
I'm not joking. My son gets it. My son gets it because he's grown up doing it. So when he builds one, he gets it because he's seen it work, and his son is like, yeah, like he gets on my ass if I cut any type of corner. Dad, don't you dare touch that. Here, Dad, don't let your face touch that licking branch. Watch it, Dad. That licking. Anyway, so and this is what gets me excited about hunting whitetails this way is I can apply this tactic at them year round. And what's even cooler about it, what's even more amazing about it, is I get whitetails to come to me and grow up on my scrapes and get so comfortable with them that when they reach their 5th and 6th birthday, they've actually kind of got comfortable there in the daylight, and they're willing to check in the daylight. And I feel like I have a little bit of an advantage versus them not being comfortable there. Again, sometimes I have to throw one at a new buck in the middle of the season.
Right.
And I'm fine with that too. If it's anywhere near the rut, they're on it. They are checking it, man. They want to know. And I'm not putting one deer scent in there. I'm putting multiple deer forehead profiles and urine profiles. Multiple.
Yeah, so let's transition to that, to actually how you're making them, like the details about how like you're actually pulling these things together. Like what, let's talk about, the type of licking branch you want to use, like how big are you making them? How close in
Yeah.
proximity are they to an existing community scrape? Like all that stuff.
Right. So some of the most important details are, I'm hunting Midwest. I'm hunting 3 states up here in the north. I've hunted in Alberta. The first thing I do anywhere I go, and especially in my own home ground up here, which is 3 different states, every drainage, I pay extreme close attention to detail of what the deer prefer. When it comes to licking branch species and the visual that I build in a specific drainage, guess where I got that information from my scouting? From what the deer have already showed me at other community scrapes in the same drainage.
Yeah.
I picked up it's so important to pick up on all those little details of what the deer like.
Mm-hmm.
I'll put them on there's only in most drainages, there's 1 or 2 species that I will use based on what the deer have showed me in those given drainages of what to use for licking branch. And I have no problem harvesting the licking branch and moving it and strapping it to a pine tree. It doesn't matter. I make sure they have the licking branch that they like.
Mm-hmm.
I'm obviously looking for a nice dirt bed area where there's some actual possibility to make the dirt, make a nice bed of dirt that can hold scent. I stay out of the rocks and stay out of the sand as much as I can. And, I really pay attention to all those little things. But what's key is you got to place that scrape where that buck is huntable and killable based on where you put that scrape. Mm-hmm. You're wasting your time if you go put a scrape in a perfect location to get him to check it. But if you can't hunt that spot and if you can't access it and get out of there, you just ruined that whole, in my opinion, that whole setup, because that buck will be on to you instantly if you don't set it up based on how the wind is going to work for him every day to get to it. You're not even in the game.
Right.
So then when I get to the actual details, I mimic what I see for community scrapes in those local areas. The species, the way that they're beat up, the way that the vertical licking branches hang, and it's based on finding them. I find them in those areas, and then I mimic that, and I make it look extremely authentic to them. It looks just like the one they know down the ridge, 800 yards, if that makes sense.
Right.
Copy all of that, but the entire time I'm basing the positioning of that scrape on wind and thermals. I'm letting the wind and thermal work for me 24/7 every day of the week or every year of the week. That a buck could be using a bedding zone where most of that wind and thermal is sending that scent daily. It's just incredible to see, too, how quick deer jump on those. I mean, they're on them instantly. I mean, I had a guy from Michigan this year, a really cool guy I did a podcast with. I think it was Steve Crawford. I hope I got that name right. Really good guy. Anyway, I sent him my kit. He put it out. He texted me back. He said, "I can't believe this, Troy. This was summer. Because I got $17 on this in 24 hours." I couldn't. I mean, I told him. I said, "Hey, that's a number."
Yeah.
He goes, "Yeah." He goes, "I can't believe it." He goes, I positioned it with great cover. I knew there was bucks bedding in the area. He goes, "I can't believe it, Troy. There's $17 on this in 24 hours." Now, are you going to get $17 everywhere? Heck no. I'll never get $17 on one in 24 hours. I don't have the deer numbers to do that.
Right.
But for me, it's all about getting the right buck that you're targeting to elicit his response in the daylight. That's the key, and be able to hunt it.
Right. Yeah.
As far as the dirt work goes and the actual laying it all out, I always spray my hands with that Vanishing Hunter, and I like to wear latex gloves if it's not too hot out. If my hands are going to sweat, I don't. I just spray my hands down. The dirt I always dig up with a long stick on purpose from the woods and pack it away and throw it away. Just simple things like that. Mm-hmm. I don't want to pack tools miles in, so I don't do any of that. I really make the dirt bed look like an authentic communal scrape that these deer have seen for years and they're used to. I really load them up heavy with scent initially. I don't care what month it is, because I want to get that scent I want to get those scent molecules and that scent cone out into the thermals and the wind for a long distance. I want it to travel a mile at least.
Right.
And when I do my licking branch forehead gland, initially on the first build, I always spray it, not only on the licking branches, but I go up in elevation above the licking branches on whatever tree I'm using or whatever. And I don't care what, even if I've transplanted the licking branch, say, onto a black pine tree, I still go way up into the needles above when I initially build it, because I want the wind and the thermals to push that scent of the forehead gland out through the woods a long ways. Right. So I really load it up initially. The deer come in, they take it over, they start marking it with their natural scent. The only time I mark it again with my scents is when I'm there to hunt it or check a card, and that's it. That way I'm not intruding on them. You were talking about having a cell camera. Mm-hmm. That's great. I love running a cell camera. I just don't get service in very many of my spots. But where I do, I love that whole cell camera idea because I'm not intruding on them.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of my, a lot of the community scrapes that I find, I typically, if I have service, I'll usually always run cell cameras on them for that reason, where I don't show up until I know the deer that I want to potentially kill is starting to show himself, and it might be, and it might be that he's, might be that he's shown up on the cusp of daylight, where it's like he's 15 minutes or 20 minutes out or 30 minutes out even. It's like, and I'll just kind of watch. And as I know he's getting closer, it's like I kind of figure, I'm like, all right, well, it's going to be about 3 days and he's going to be about primed to show up in daylight, and so I kind of play it like that. It also,
no, that's wise.
Yeah, it's also bit me in the rear end because that primary scrape or community scrape I was telling you about, the one I was trying to kill, he showed up 3 different times in daylight last year. All 3 times I was working, watching my cell camera go off, showing me he was there in daylight 3 different times at like between 7:30 and 9:30.
If he's showing up that late in the morning, he's pretty comfortable there.
Yeah, for sure. So you mentioned you'll put a couple different deer profiles in this scrape. Like, what are you using? All the same kind of synthetic urine, or are you using different types? Like, how are you getting so many different profiles to put into that scrape?
Well, that's the magic question. Everybody wants all my info, so I'll share some of it. But yeah, I've got my own. Yeah, I've got my own mix that I've worked years on. I'm a big fan of synthetics. Buck Fever Synthetics is my foundation.
Okay.
Buck Fever Synthetics I've been using since the 90s.
Okay.
Since the 1990s in scrapes. Now, back up if you will with me before I got in contact with those guys. I was digging up hot scrapes, digging the dirt out of them, putting them in Ziploc bags back in the 80s, freezing them and using them the next season or that season.
Oh, wow.
So I was transplanting 8 or 10 deer to a new spot 10, 15 miles away and just sprinkling that frozen urine and let it just, warm up and boom. And I'd even use them a year later. Every buck and doe I used to kill when I was younger, I would dissect the urine out of the bladders.
Okay.
So I was saving all that stuff and freezing it instantly. So I was using true, wild, non-farm deer, no feces in the urine. And I was either getting the dirt, collecting the dirt, little tiny hand garden shovel with my Ziplocs,
right,
or any deer anybody killed, I'd say, hey, let me have that bladder. And they'd look at me like, what in the hell do you want that bladder for? And I'd take that bladder and take a syringe and pull all the urine out of it nice and clean and freeze it. So that's what I was doing before synthetics till I got onto synthetics. And, my background's kinesiology, biology. So for me, it all just made sense even years ago when I was young to use this urine to get deer to come to me. And then the whole synthetic thing came around, and a lot of our states, including Idaho, wanted you to not use protein-based natural urines because of the disease factor involved.
Right.
So I got in with Buck Fever, and I was blown away at how well the Buck Fever urines worked on my deer. And it never rots. It never spoils. So I didn't have to freeze. I didn't have to deal with any of that. And I could just carry it in a bottle. It could be 2 or 3 years old, still works great.
Right.
So I use the multiple profiles of Buck Fever, plus I use a couple other ingredients that is my deal. I'm probably not going to share it all, but it's all synthetic.
Yep.
I've just kind of built my own mix, if you will.
Yeah. Okay.
But buck fever is my foundation of it, and their forehead gland is great. I've had guys say, "Well, it smells kind of like vanilla." Well, guess what? There's a reason why he wants. That's part of getting them to the tree,
Right.
getting them to the licking branch. But there's other ingredients in there that are the deer scent. So anyway,
Right.
yeah, that's kind of my base. I like multiple profiles of deer. To this day, I'll still collect a very hot peed-in scrape, and to this day, every now and then, if it's just rocking in there, I'll go collect a little bit of that dirt, throw it in a Ziploc, and transplant it to another scrape. And it's amazing what you see then.
Man.
Because you're adding multiple new deer scent identities to that scrape.
Yeah. Man, that's a great idea. I've never thought of doing that. And now
I don't know a lot of guys that did. And I started doing it on my own when I was young, and it just made sense to me.
No, when
it's
you
really
say
not that hard to. It's really not hard to freeze piss that's in dirt. It's not hard to freeze it.
Right.
A Ziploc and a little shovel. That's all you need. I used to steal my mom's little garden shovel back in the 80s. Troy, where is my little? And it's tiny. It's a little tiny hand. Yeah. Little tiny garden shovel for planting flowers. You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. And you probably don't need that much of the dirt either. I'd imagine a little bit probably goes a long way.
Gallon Ziploc bag, you hold more than you want to pack.
Right. Yeah. Man,
just doing that kind of thing to manipulate their natural biology to check in the daylight more often because they're intrigued.
Yeah.
Where'd all these deer come from?
Yeah. Is there anything else you do to the location aside from the scrape, like that's prep or anything like that, like beyond just the scrape, or is it just the scrape and then you're good to go?
What do you mean? Ask that again.
Is there anything else that you do? Because I know some guys might make like I don't know, they might make 2 or 3 in an area, right? To kind of like just, have a couple, all like within like around like a tree or around a bush or whatever, or they might make a mock rub that's nearby or a couple mock rubs or something like that. Is there anything like that you're doing, or is it just always about that one primary or that one mock scrape?
Oh no, I mix it up big time. I almost always incorporate several mock rubs with my forehead gland on it. Almost always, because I want that place to look like a traditional war zone. Yeah. I want bucks to walk in there and just go, holy shit. There's rubs everywhere, which is visual.
Yep.
And then I have those rubs. I make mock rubs, and I cover that with the forehead gland that's also up on the licking branch.
Mm-hmm.
And I want a big buck to roll in there and literally have his hair bristle up. And that's what they do on video. Right. They'll bristle. Right. They'll bristle, and they'll get the visual. They'll get the scent. They see it. I mean, it just really impacts them because, that's what they're used to seeing at those great communal areas where a lot goes down. They're used to seeing that. So I lay that out. And then a lot of times I'll just, if it looks good for a cluster, I'll build 2 or 3 in a cluster. Mm-hmm. Or if I feel like, I just need one big central one right here. I base it all on
what you're seeing.
Feel for that specific, what I'm seeing and the feel for that specific spot.
Yeah.
And I've seen it all built by the deer different ways too. Mm-hmm. But it's, there's places where clusters belong. Yeah. And it's usually because the right licking branch, there's multiple options for that licking branch right there. Mm-hmm. In a close proximity, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Where I'll build a single a lot of times is on steeper ground where it's real steep, hard to find a good spot. But man, I'll tell you, there's some great whitetail hunting in the mountains on side hills that a lot of people overlook.
Yeah, that's actually whitetail
deer. Whitetail deer don't care if it's a little steep; they don't mind.
Yeah, and it's funny.
They'll check it if it's good security cover.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that because like one of the places that I've been investigating and kind of exploring, that's where I ended up finding a bunch of really good deer was on the side hills. It was like and I was getting all daylight on those. It was on the tops. I was getting a lot of nighttime pictures, and then I moved or put some cameras on some side hill areas where I figured they were probably making their way through. And sure enough, I'm getting them at like 8 o'clock in the morning, 9 o'clock in the morning, sometimes 10 o'clock, so it's like, I kind of feel like I'm all up in their bedroom at that point. Like if I'm getting them that, late in the morning and stuff like that. So,
and something to keep in mind for anybody that hunts any type of steep topography in any way, even like when I hunt Southern Ohio and those bluffs in that country, it's the same way. Mm-hmm. Just remember, deer work vertical with thermals outside of the rut year round.
Mm.
Bed to feed, up and down, up and down, up and down when there's some steepness.
Mm-hmm.
But as soon as the rut rolls around, what's the easiest way on a map, on a topographical map to cover ground for a buck? It's not vertical.
Mm-hmm.
It's side hilling.
Yeah.
It's running above and below using the thermals of the time of the day to scent check everything, and they'll run lateral lines.
Yeah, and
Bucks will run lateral big time.
Yeah, and that makes sense because, as you mentioned, like that bed to feed, it's like it's security and food. So I'm just going to go nose in the wind back if I can, right? And then whenever I'm checking, when the rut rolls around, it's like, no, I'm trying to get as big of a scent profile as I can and cover as much ground by just traveling this one elevation line, and I can check, a bottom and 2 ridges doing that. You know what I mean?
So, exactly, and play that game during those times of the year on where you're set up.
Yeah. Man, I've kept you here long enough, dude. We've been going at it for like an hour and 45 minutes or something like that. I want to be sensitive to your time. I appreciate you spending all this time with me. I have one last hard question for you that I always like to end with. You ready? It's going to be the hardest one of the whole night. You ready?
All right. I'm ready.
All right. So you're building a 3-on-3 basketball team of DIY, public land, whitetail bow hunters. What 3 guys would you pick to be on your team if you had to have 3 guys fill tags? Who are the 3 guys you're putting on your team?
So you want actual names?
Yeah, actual names, and they don't have to be alive. They can be dead, alive. They could be people that you don't even know, that you just know of, and they don't have to be known. They could be people that are just local, that are just killers.
Okay. Gosh, I know some good ones. Well, 100%, I'm putting Andre DeQuisto on with me.
Oh, yeah.
Andre's a beast, and he will do whatever it takes to get it done, and he's very proven, and thinks way outside of the box. And Andre and I hunt totally different habitat and terrain deer. Mm-hmm. But he's one guy that when I listen to Andre talk, I pick something up from.
Yeah, it's...
and I'm talking about a guy that I think could come out and do this with me out here in the mountains.
Oh yeah, dude, I have no doubt. I've had a chance to talk to Andre one time at a show. I'm friends with Cody. I know Cody and stuff like that, and I didn't get to meet Andre until like a couple years ago. And the thing that I noticed about him, and then I'll let you finish picking your 3, was, and this was something that I found with guys like yourself and just guys who are really good archery, like really good bow hunters that kill big mature deer, is that when he and I was talking, he was intently listening to everything that I was talking about, because he was genuinely looking to see, like, is there something I can pick up from this guy? Is he going to say something that maybe I didn't think of, or he thinks of something differently than the way I do that I can use? And that's the biggest thing that I notice with guys like that and like yourself that are just that are next level dudes. They're always looking for the edge, and they don't care where it comes from, and they're humble in their quest to find it, essentially. So. Yeah. But anyway.
And I think you nailed it. They don't talk over the top of you. They listen.
Yep.
Now, Andre's that way. I'm fortunate. I don't know if you know this, but I work with Andre and Whitetail Addictions guys.
Yeah.
Film for him and do that stuff. But he's always impressed me since I met him personally, of just how he really thinks big picture and above and beyond what a lot of people are thinking. And a lot of times, it's hard for people to understand what Andre's saying at first until you really yourself have been out there enough to see what he sees, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it totally does.
Okay, my number 2, I got 3, right?
Yep. Yes, sir.
All right. This is the guy that when I was young, that I truly believe had some stuff figured out before a lot of guys and was doing it DIY hardcore, and that's Miles Keller.
Mm-hmm.
Miles is a wonderful man. He's a very humble, hardcore. He's killed so many big whitetails. Way back in the day when I was trying to find some information that was actually applicable for mountain whitetails when I was really young, Miles was talking about things like wind edges and hunting wind that was good for a buck and not you, things like that.
Yeah.
And you look at Miles' history, great guy, super humble, but man, he's a killer. He was a killer. I've always really liked Miles. So Miles and Andre, and now I'm going to go with the young guy on the next one, because I got to I'm picking all the old dudes, and I'm an old dude. So now I got to go with the young one. I think he'll like this. And there's several I could pick. And I'm going to piss somebody off that I didn't pick them, and it's not because they don't deserve it. I can pick Cody all day.
Right.
But I hope Cody listens to this. He might. I could pick Cody all day. He's a freaking animal.
Yeah, he is.
But I'm not going to pick Cody because everybody picked Cody. But I'm telling you, Cody's freaking, he's a beast.
Yeah.
I love how he does his own thing his own way, too. I'm going to go with, and this is a guy that's always impressed me. He's a good friend of mine. And the reason he's a good friend of mine, he's really impressed me, is just how smart he is about everything. He's very smart, meticulous. I got to say Steve Pinks, too. He needs to be on this list, but I told you I wasn't going to pick an old guy like me. So I'm going to go with the young guy younger than me. Very smart. I've been able to share some hunts with him. He just really, really puts everything into it, and he's an extremely hardworking, intelligent guy. Justin Hollinsworth. I put Justin out there because Justin's going to kill a buck. Andre's going to kill a buck. And I don't know if Miles still hunts like he used to, but Miles' heyday, he's killing a buck. Right. Guaranteed. So I'll go with Justin, Miles, Andre.
Man, that is a 3-on-3 team that I think most people don't want to see in the tournament. I'm just
I truly believe this. Most bucks wouldn't want to deal with those three guys.
I would. You would get no arguments from me. We'll put it that.
And I will say this too. Those are three guys, and this may sound cocky, but it may. But those are three guys that I think could actually come out into my neck of the woods. And I'm telling you, this country it's an obstacle, big time.
For sure.
I think they could adapt, overcome, and because every one of those guys has grit. I mean, they're just hardcore. One of the biggest things those guys have is mental toughness. They don't let anything get them down. That's what I admire about them. I feel like I'm that kind of guy too. Nothing ever phases them. Their target best buck they've ever hunted gets killed, they move on. I'm that same mentality. You just move on. Yeah. And you always have an ace in the hole or 2 or 3 extras to move to. That's how prepared they are. But my whole point is I believe that those three guys could figure it out anywhere, any habitat, get it figured out and adjust and be flexible and be a killer anywhere. That's why I picked them.
Makes sense, man. And like I said, you'll excuse me, you'll get no arguments from me. Like those are a handful of names that you'd be hard pressed to find better folks, man. But dude, I appreciate your time, man. I could sit and talk to you for 4 hours. Like so
I love whitetails, man. And yeah. I like talking about it.
And you got me fired up, man. I'm headed to the big woods this weekend for my first hunt on that new piece that I spent some time trying to figure out this winter and spring. And you got me pretty fired up to go chase some mountain whitetails this weekend. So I appreciate that too.
Right on, man. Well, good luck to you, Clint. It's been a pleasure. I hope you enjoyed it. And maybe we'll get back on and talk after we kill some stuff, or maybe some shed hunting stuff in the spring.
Sounds good, man. Where can more people follow along with what you got going on this year? You social media, anything like that, where they can track you?
Oh yeah, my Instagram is where I communicate with guys. I really try to make sure I talk to anybody that reaches out to me and I help out. On my Instagram, it's MTN_man33, Mountain Man 33, MTN_man 33. And I got that's where I do most of my hunt and talk traffic is there. Yeah. Guys can find me there. My Facebook's pretty full. Like it's, maxed out. And then Lone Wolf Custom Gear, part of the Whitetail Addictions team, Mobile Hunters. We talk whitetails all the time on our Mobile Hunters page. Facebook is a really great page for guys that are getting into it. And then Buck Fever Synthetics too. They're really good to me. I've rep their brand for decades, and I actually have my mix here that I send all over the country if I want it, or if they're not interested in my mix and guys want to get Buck Fever Synthetics, they can pull it right up, buckfever.com.
Yep. Cool. All right, man. I appreciate you, buddy. Good luck this season, and we'll definitely have to get back on here once, hopefully, once we both fill a few tags. Sound good?
Yeah, sounds good. I've had the elk bug this month, but I'm telling you, I'm ready. I've got some big whitetails. It's time to go get after them in October.
All right, man. Well, I look forward to some grip and grin pictures on your Instagram profile, buddy.
Hey, same for you. Same to you, and thanks again.
All right, folks, that is a wrap for today's show. I'd like to thank all of you for listening, and if you haven't yet, please head over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating, and be sure to subscribe to the podcast. And while you're at it, head over to YouTube and give us a sub there too. I'd be super appreciative if you do those couple things for me. But before I shut this thing down, I need to give a big shout out to our partners who continue to help us make this podcast possible. Tethered, Spartan Forge, Exodus Outdoor Gear, Skull Brew Coffee Company, and Maven Optics. And until next time, we'll see y'all.